big hello and welcome. Thank you for joining in. On behalf of the Ashank Desai Center for Leadership and Organization Development, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you all. The IIM Ahmedabad Leadership Lecture Series is a marquee initiative envisaged to be a forum that brings the ideas, insights, and expertise of renowned global leaders to discuss the most trending leadership issues. I am reminded of the quote by John Chambers of Cisco when he said, at least 40% of all businesses will die in the next 10 years if they do not figure out how to change their entire company to accommodate new technologies. So the topic of the day is leadership in the digital age, and we are privileged to have with us today Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, who of course needs no introduction. Very quickly, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan is founder and chairman of 5F World, a platform for global consulting and investing in digital skills and digital transformation. He's also the chairman of Honeywell Automation India and Lighthouse Communities Foundation, and a central board member of the State Bank of India, Global Talent Track, AVP in Singapore, and many others. Dr. Natarajan has received the Distinguished Alumnus Award of NITIE and IIT Bombay. 2 case studies on his work have been written and taught at Harvard Business School. Welcome, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan. And in conversation with them today are Professor Pramila Agarwal and Professor Sunil Sharma, our star professors from IIM Ahmedabad. As I invite you, Dr. Ganesh, and perhaps you would like to share your screen, may I also request the audiences to and encourage you to kindly post your questions on the chat or on the Q&A. The entire structure of the session is 90 minutes, of which 60 minutes is when Dr. Ganesh Natarajan will be in conversation after presenting his thoughts with Dr. Sunil Sharma and Professor Pramila. And after that, we will have the audience Q&A. Over to you, Dr. Ganesh.
Thank you very much, Piyush, and good evening to all of you. And it's an absolute pleasure for me to be doing this session because Ashank Desai, after whom the center's name, has been a very, very close friend of mine for over 40 years. So it's a real privilege to be doing this leadership talk. And of course, with Professor Pramila and Professor Sunil, and it's going to be amazing. The way we've structured it to keep it kind of interactive is that I've split my talk into 4 parts. So I'll show you some slides for maybe for 7 minutes. Then we will do an interactive session with the 2 professors. And then I'll move to section 2 and then section 3 and then section 4. And we'll finish all this by about 7 o'clock, which leaves more than enough time for your questions. So I'm sure at the end of it, some of you who are on this chat can also ask live or ask on audio. And of course, you're most welcome to post. Great. I hope you can see my presentation now.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So broadly speaking, we're talking about leadership. I'll keep coming back to the theme of leadership because it is a leadership center. But we all know it's a digital age. Digital has meant so many things to different people. And I thought we should cover it in 4 segments. First is IIMA. Let me start with my hypothesis that digital success, and we wrote a recently published book on digital success, is far from being only about technology. So if anybody ever thought as a leader that you could delegate technology to the digital to the chief digital officer or chief technology officer or chief information officer, I mean, they were headed for disaster. So what we'll do is we'll talk about all the aspects that make digital CEOs and digital entrepreneurs successful. I mean, today, of course, is a very interesting time, as many of you in Ahmedabad would surely know. I mean, the stock markets have been in some kind of a weird yo-yo, and even the so-called, darling stocks of technology in the US and in India have been coming off. And if at any point of time or at the end of the Q&A, you want to ask me what is the future of these tech stocks, happy to have a chat about it. But we'll cover the 4 parts. The first is what I call the contours of the digital age. What does the digital era really mean to all of us? Then we'll move into a quick discussion from a very leadership point of view, technology, not getting into details, but saying, okay, what is that kaleidoscope or smorgasbord, if you will, of technologies that you should at least broadly know about? Then we'll move into what I think is the most critical determinant of success in the digital era, which is the leveraging of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and moving from what we call descriptive to predictive and prescriptive analytics. And in the last section, we'll talk about, so how do you put it all this together? I mean, if you're a young student wanting to be an entrepreneur in the digital age, how do you think about it? If you're a CEO or a middle manager saying that, look, I must make digital work for me, what's the kind of innovation you can look at? And as I said, we'll finish all this by about 7 o'clock, and then we will throw it open for any questions that you may have. So let me quickly move to the first one, which is contours of the digital age. In every segment, I still remember about 2 years back or 2.5 years back, I was invited to the Artificial Intelligence Conference of the Middle East in Abu Dhabi. And I showed this wonderful slide talking about which sectors are most impacted by digital. And naturally, retail and e-commerce were right on top. And something has to be at the bottom. So unfortunately, in that particular session, I had at the bottom oil and natural gas. And when I stopped for questions, the first question came from an Arab sheikh. He stood up and said, look, in ADNOC and AdGas, we are experts in digital. How can you put us at the bottom? I said, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that and all that stuff. The point I'm making is every company, irrespective of what you do, where you come from, is impacted by digital. And if you look at some trends, and this is by no means exhaustive, insurance. I mean, we all took insurance as a policy against something happening in the future. Today, if a young woman is going out on a date with a person she doesn't really know enough about, she can actually take usage-based insurance, I mean, for the next 3 hours. We've all seen flight insurance, etc. So a lot of the insurance is moving towards a digital understanding, the potential of fraud, the potential of risk, etc., and dynamically re-architecting the policies as you go. I'll talk a little bit about an amazing company in India called Egon Life, which is completely reinventing insurance the digital way. So these are companies which see the future and are building full companies around it. Similarly, e-commerce, I mean, we all know that, not just the Nykas and the Zomatos and the Swiggies, but even traditional e-commerce with Amazon, so many others, is all moving towards what we call cognitive or AI-based personal shoppers, social networks through which commerce happens. Retail, of course. I mean, today retail is still very much online, but today if you go to a Costco in the US or even to, let's say, any lifestyle or any other store in India, it's still what my friend Chandra of Tata Sons calls digital, which is still a physical service. You can also buy on the internet. You can do what you want. But at some point of time, even the shop assistants will all be robots. The store greeters will be robots. You pretty much know what you're buying by research you've done or AI has done for you before you enter the store. Manufacturing, of course. I mean, I live in Pune, and even close by, there is a company called Kirloskar Oil Engines. And every oil engine they've been sending out for the last 3 years have chips embedded in it. And it's monitored from a control room. So the oil engine is being monitored in Jharkhand, let's say from Pune, and the people are being advised, okay, this is when you fill oil and everything else. So everything is through a fully controlled mechanism. Finance, we all know. I mean, blockchain. I mean, Bitcoin, of course, goes up and down, but the underlying technology of blockchain, distributed ledgers, smart contracting, I think that's being adopted by probably 30% of trade finance worldwide. And that's going to be very, very significant in the way smart cities are run, in the way financing is done, in the way contracting is done. That's very clear. Healthcare, of course, is an ever-evolving phenomenon. Today, thanks to COVID, most of us are comfortable with telemedicine, which was not the case 3 years ago. But if you look at healthcare, I think, in terms of 3D printing, I mean, somebody in a war zone can get bandages printed, can get everything done. So I think we're talking about a completely different paradigm in terms of healthcare. This slide is important because when we think of digital, first thoughts that come to my mind are, oh, Google, oh, Amazon, oh, Facebook. And quite honestly, these are products of an earlier era where it was a low cost or zero cost model. They were aggregating buyers. They were taking your assets. I mean, we keep saying that, the real digital players have no assets. I mean, Facebook and Amazon don't own anything. But they really are able to monetize your data or a manufacturer's items and make sure it's available at lowest cost and least friction, maximum efficiency to the customer. When Netflix and Disney and people like that embrace digital, they moved into the second model, what we call experience model. So empowering customers, personalization, instant gratification. I mean, even today I'm watching 4 things on Netflix simultaneously. I'm probably watched 45 minutes of something. I watched this crazy movie I've been watching called Kali Kali Aankhe. I mean, maybe I've seen 2 episodes of this. And Netflix knows what I'm seeing. Okay, Netflix may not be very successful in India today, but it's just changing the nature of how we consume even entertainment. Of course, education and enlightenment and everything else. What's most important is the platform model. Today, if you look at digital India, one thing they're really proud about is what my friend Nandan Nilekani delivered, which was, if you remember, they call it the Jam Trinity, that is Jandhan, Aadhaar, mobility. And one of the reasons why a Paytm is today trading at 52% of its issue price, less than its issue price, and so many of the payment platforms are a little worried, is because UPI has democratized everything. And today, each one of us knows that at the lowest cost, you can do payment transactions. The same thing will happen in agriculture, and healthcare, and education, in skills, in SME clusters, etc., etc. So all these, if you imagine India at 2047, it'll be maybe 50, 60 platforms, and the platforms all connecting the full ecosystem. So that's what we're moving towards. To people like me and the ministers and the secretary of MITIE, the Ministry of IT, that's the real $1 trillion digital economy that we're all excited about. What it means is leading companies. And it doesn't matter whether you're Nykaa, it doesn't matter whether you're Unilever or Hindustan Unilever. When people are saying that the whole data, digital analytics will actually spawn completely new businesses. And let me conclude this section by just showing you a few examples. I mentioned Egon Life, which is the middle. And from everything from reaching out to customers, to data, to fraud detection, to underwriting, etc., it's a completely friction-free model. And this is going to change InsurTech or insurance as we go along. Bajaj Finserv, already the 800-pound gorilla in the fintech space, I mean, is now moving towards a completely new model called BFS Direct, which is entirely customer focused. So every financial service, from general insurance to life insurance to loans to whatever that you desire, will be available at the click of maybe two clicks of a button. Fino Payments Bank, which I was on the board of for a couple of years, is an amazing model. I mean, the first payments bank to be really successful, to actually list in this country. And it is actually making small town and rural India through even the Kirana stores becoming business correspondents and really changing the face of payments in this country. So the point I'm making is, it doesn't matter whether you're a huge company like Bajaj Finserv, a relative startup like Fino Payments, or of course an Egon Life, which is in a new avatar of a fully digital model. All these are transformations that we're seeing happen. And also, of course, you're seeing a number of new companies really coming to the party. Digital fashion, as many of you know, it's digi retail, which is very important. You can actually, in your avatar on Metaverse or Facebook, be wearing 15 new dresses, and you never bought the dress. It's your e-avatar that is really going to a party wearing that. I mean, mind-boggling, isn't it? A company called Latent View Analytics started in Chennai just some time back, already like trading at huge multiples on the stock exchange. A company I'm on the board of called Systech in Los Angeles, completely changing the way machine learning is used. Fractal Analytics, which just became a unicorn. I can give you example after example, but the point I'm making is, whether you're an incumbent, whether you're a digital success story that is waiting to happen, leadership in this space is completely different. And the leader's attributes in terms of understanding digital will determine how successful the company is. So let me stop here and take questions from Pramila and Sunil.
Hi, Ganesh. Thanks so much for this wonderful insights about the contours of digital age. So when you spoke about three different models, cost model, experience model, platform model, cost and experience have always existed. So like they were called cost leadership and differentiation. So the platform model seems to be a new addition. So are we going to see platformization of business? And if yes, then how can leaders manage this transition?
It's a very interesting question. And you take one of the market leaders in IT services, Accenture, for instance. And even as maybe 6 years back, when I was actually doing some work as a digital advisor to senior advisor in digital to McKinsey, we actually worked with Anand Narasimhan, who moved actually from Accenture to head digital in McKinsey. And Anand's point was that, look, the whole success of Accenture was creating multiple platforms, horizontal platforms for accounting, payroll, etc., micro platforms for maybe microservices, and then vertical platforms. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, Digital India will see massive numbers of platforms for healthcare, etc. We ourselves, I mean, I'm part of an initiative called the Bharat Initiative of NASSCOM, where in the Bharat Initiative, what I'm working on is women's entrepreneurship. To give you an example, I mean, since many of you are in Gujarat, if you go to the Ran of Kutch, there's so many entrepreneurs. I mean, I remember sitting in the Ran of Kutch with this lady called Pavi Ben, and she does amazing work the world doesn't know about. So in the Bharat initiative, we are saying, can we identify maybe 50 lakh women entrepreneurs and really understand what their ecosystem is, build a complete platform where potential customers, potential funders, designers, all of them can come together. So imagine the model. It's almost like the wonder I explained to you about Netflix. If that can make Pabi Ben from Bhuj come up and succeed in her market, imagine the change it will do to the country. So I'm very excited about platforms, as you can see. So whether it was Accenture model of building platforms for large organizations, or it's a country platform model, I think that's the way transactions will work in future.
Ganesh, I have another question which is related to it, but there is a little bit element of self-interest also. Look in the education space, and you talked about cost, experience, and platform. So there were Khan academies, right, which were actually sharing information for free. And then now you have in this space the upgrads and the eruditus of the world. And pre-COVID, there used to be some at least chatter or some discussion that these companies are going to pose a very significant threat to university system, which is that they have actually operated in a traditional model and they have not changed much. Now, obviously, if we look at COVID experience, people have benefited from online engagement. And most universities also have now embraced part of that digital ecosystem. But going forward, what do you think now? For example, when I look at in India, there are some 3,700 plus MBA schools. And then you have all types of MBA schools. Do you think that should incumbents worry about the advent of EdTech? Or do you think that there will be a very symbiotic relationship, these will coexist and there won't be any serious threat to institutions like us?
Sunil, let me answer that question through a personal experience. I mean, I was privileged to be spending 10 weeks in Harvard Business School when this whole discussion was just starting. And I remember chatting with my old friend, Nitin Noria, who was then the dean. And Nitin said, we're building this thing called HBX. And HBX, I mean, initially I was like confused because they were doing it in a studio in Boston. And really, world-class video technology. The goal was to get, professors of the caliber of Michael Porter and Rosebud Moss Cantor to actually teach through technology. Fast forward 5 years. Today, if you go to Harvard Business School, and I'm sure it's happening in IIMA Ahmedabad as well, I mean, you'll find that many students opt out of class. So you could either come into the classroom in the 90-seater circular room, or you could be at home, or you could be anywhere, but it's the same experience, absolutely. And I remember, I mean, Professor Bharat Anand and I were discussing this on HBX. So the concept of HBX was, how do you give the student and the professor a better experience than coming to the classroom? And the way it works, I'm sure many of you know about it. But if, let's say, you're Professor Sunil Sharma and you're actually teaching in the Boston studio, you will come there. In Harvard, the biggest challenge a faculty member has is at the end of the class, he has to remember who asked intelligence questions, he has to rate all the students, etc., etc., etc. In this, what's happening is he's teaching a screen of maybe 80 faces in front of him. And let's say somebody from Estonia on screen number 57 is kind of feeling sleepy and he's nodding off. Now, in a real class, the professor is teaching. You also have to make eye contact to note what's here. AI is watching. So AI will give a prompt to the professor saying, Professor Sunil, 57 is going to sleep. Why don't you ask him a question? This is almost directing how you can ensure class engagement. And at the end of it, the rating of each student's participation does not need to be done by Professor Sunil Sharma. It can be done by the AI too. So the AI bot will do the rating, display it to Professor Sunil, and he just agrees to it. And the quality of the learning is better because they can use multimedia technology online. So potentially, I remember when I first started doing these multiple sessions on Zoom, I was like, oh my God, I can't make eye contact. I don't even know who's there in the audience. But today I'm so used to it that when I was teaching a real class 2 months back, I was like, oh, why are all these people moving around? So it's a complete cognitive shift that we're all making. And my feeling is, of course, recently, I think we heard that UGC has stopped traditional universities from working with EdTechs. To my mind, that's shooting ourselves in the foot. Because we should encourage innovation of all kinds. Now, whether it's innovation of the HBX kind, where universities are adopting the model, or innovation of the partnering kind. I think let's not fight change. Change must be embraced And I think the student must benefit.
Just one quick follow-up question. So I teach strategy, and in strategy, they say that only competitive advantage, which really works for organization, is the one which can be sustained. Now, if more and more organization, let's say I'm talking about specifically educational institution, will embrace digital, blend digital, increase the digital component, do you think that in future it would be much easier to imitate each other, and therefore companies probably will lose competitive advantage?
Which is why, I mean, the innovation cycle, which used to be maybe one a year, has now become once a week. So literally you got to innovate. And my hero for this is Jeff Bezos. I mean, if you read the book on Amazon, I mean, Amazon is one company. We keep talking about, like, I'm a great believer of the Michael Tushman model of, of ambidextrous innovation, that you can have incremental innovation going on continuously and a few disruptive innovation models. But Amazon does disruptive innovation literally every 18 months and incremental innovation every day. So I'm saying that is probably the model of the future. And we'll talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. Thanks, Ganesh.
So let's talk a little bit about technology. I won't take too much time on this section. This we all know. I mean, how did digital hit us? First, we heard about something called mobile phones, which of course is ubiquitous in India today. Then we started hearing about Facebook and social media, which is the S part of it. Then cloud computing, anything as a service. It started with software as a service, moved to infrastructure as a service, data as a service, platform as a service. Today, almost everything, you literally don't buy anything. CapEx is OpEx. Everything can be rented. And then, of course, analytics. So that's what the SMAC stack was. In the second wave, shop floor started feeling the benefits of beacons and sensors. IoT, or the Internet of Things, came in. Also, user experience and user interfaces started getting much better. I mentioned blockchains earlier. In the third wave, we're seeing much more of computer vision, where even everything can be available in front of you. Yesterday, I was test driving a Hyundai Alcatraz car. Stunning. I mean, as I moved out of the garage, there's a top camera. As you do a right turn, immediately a camera pops up saying what all is there on the right. I mean, this is not augmented reality, but it's just helping life become so easy. I think all of us know that, I mean, with what Mark Zuckerberg is talking about and everybody is getting excited about, metaverse would really mean a completely new reality to actually start looking at. And I'll talk about a little bit about it as we go along later. Of course, robotics and robotic process automation. I mentioned 3D printing earlier. And in the future waves that we will see, and it's already beginning to happen, I think Mr. Ambani is already talking about quantum computing, 5G without China's participation is going to happen. Cognitive automation, where it's automated, but intelligently automated. Social listening, where literally a brand owner can know exactly if somebody is saying something negative about him in Ukraine and immediately track that. In fact, I was working in social listening even 8 years ago. Augmented collaboration, where it's collaboration with a lot of intelligence built in. And if I have time, I'll give you a couple of examples. And what I just mentioned, immersive universes in metaverse. And any of you know, I mean, I remember, I think it was 10 years ago, somebody came up with something called Second Life. And when I was running this company, Zensar Technologies in Pune at that time, and we were the first to adopt it. We built a full avatar or a campus of Zensar on Second Life. And we started interviewing people. Now, people would come in maybe dressed as Robin Hood and actually show up for an interview. We had an HR department. You'll be amazed. We actually hired 10 really brilliant guys on Second Life and then said, okay, now that's fine, that's done. But now we show up at our campus in Pune and let's make you a real offer. I think this physical to digital kind of movements that we started off 10 years back is now going to come to life in a very, very big way. I mean, the Luddites would say it's bad because people will lose their connectivity, will lose human contact, etc. But if you use it well, like anything else, it's fantastic. And all this in an obvious environment of cybersecurity, which is going to become more and more challenging. So if you need to understand anything about technology, just understand these 4 waves. And remember, these waves are coming one after the other. I mean, each wave will come, next wave might come maybe 6 months down the line. These waves have taken 15 years. That's the speed at which change is going to happen. Future, distributed ledgers, blockchains, I mentioned this earlier. AI will completely imagine the future of work, which means that whether it is completely assistive AI, which is what in India we do, or augmentative AI, which increases the value of what you do, exactly what I told you about the professor teaching in the classroom, who's augmenting himself in the classroom, or autonomous AI, which we really don't want in this country because we don't want to eliminate jobs and everything else. AI Reality I already mentioned, virtual, augmented, mixed, metaverse, quantum computing, and 5G. So this is definitely the next 6 to 12 months of the future of technology. Last slide on technology. I mean, if you look at the top layer, it's everything that I told you. Big data, analytics, sensors, actuators, mobile technology, cloud computing, natural user interfaces, ubiquitous connectivity, everything is connected, exactly like my car I was test driving yesterday. What it means is, from the leadership point of view, that you be prepared for integrated digital and physical experiences. You're running a retail chain, a healthcare business, a startup, everything will morph from the web to the reality. Internet of everything, which means it's not Internet of things, but everything connected, as I mentioned. Knowledge work, you've all heard of robotic process automation. I mean, today, even many of the large banks are massively automating on knowledge work, and with AI, making it much more effective. Big data, which I'll come to in the next section, and anything as a service. When all this is not important, why are we doing all this? As CEO of a business, please understand the first benefit of digital, like it was the benefit of IT, is enhancing productivity. Because if productivity doesn't go up, why are we doing this anyway? The second, which we already talked about, is improving the experience. So I'll talk about in the next section, customer journeys, etc. How to delight the customer in a much more effective way using digital touch points in the past. And the third, which I just mentioned earlier, is finding new business models. So if you're an Aegon Life, if you're a Payments Bank, if you're a Bajaj Finserv, even if you're a state bank, okay, which is now looking at the board of state banks, we have these 17 circles, which are where the 24,000 branches reside. Looking at the call center as a different channel to do end-to-end banking. Looking at the digibank, the digital bank being a complete end-to-end channel. So who knows, a day may come when the digital bank is 90% of state bank's revenues. Anything is possible. So that's the new business model opportunity that we're looking at. So let me stop again by saying that, look, the role of a leader makes sense. Not to get confused, not to confuse with this tech wonder box, but connected to the user, connected to the customer, connected to the shareholder, connected to every stakeholder for whom this business is going to be important.
Thanks, Ganesh. Again, a very, very interesting segment. Ganesh, one of my friends, he remarked that when JEE results are out, only 500 students are happy. Even those who qualify JEE, the rest of 9,500 are extremely unhappy and disappointed. Why not feeling happy about the fact that they cracked JEE? Why they feel unhappy is because they will not be probably able to get computer science or related branches. If you look at even other engineering colleges, even people doing mechanical, civil eventually end up getting into IT jobs. Now, you talked very interesting about that the leaders need to make sense of the evolving technology and the speed at which technologies are evolving. It would be very difficult for people to stay abreast of what changes are happening. Does that mean that in terms of leadership, is the world becoming less inclusive? Because if it demands that only one type of knowledge is required, what will happen to the diversity at the top?
It's like this, Sunil. I mean, diversity at the top is important, but all we're saying is that digital is like, it's like the nervous system. The nervous system runs through all of us. So you have to have the digital nervous system built into the corporate organization. And I think nobody can say, we all know, I myself am over 60 years old. So I'm what they call a digital immigrant. 20 years back, I didn't know digital. But you kind of, get interested in it, you get immersed in it, and then you become, close to being called an expert at digital, which is dangerous. But the real digital experts are the digital natives. All of you would have seen that wonderful little video of a man bringing a, nice picture book home to his 1.5-year-old child. And you can see, and I'm seeing that with my grandson himself, that, the child is actually opening the book and then, using his hand and trying to, do this usual stuff, trying to expand the picture. Because he's so used to digital that a physical picture book no longer appeals to him. So I'm saying this is the reality. So, and don't forget that every organization, particularly young entrepreneurial organizations, are going to deal more and more with digital natives. You say millennials. Now millennials are approaching their 40s and they are 60% of your organization. The Gen Zs, the less than 25s in IT companies, are already 40% of the organization. So in that context, I don't think any CEO or any CXO, anybody using a corner office, or for that matter, any faculty member in a business school can afford to not be part of this new revolution. And in fact, I have very interesting comments by Mr. Rajendra Singh on the chat line. So he's saying that, look, HBS is just offering a session on future of management education. So I know I mentioned Harvard Business School, but it doesn't matter. I mean, today an SP Jain can disrupt Harvard Business School. IIM Ahmedabad can certainly retain its supremacy by absorbing digital. Somebody who says, I'm too big, I'm too well established, and I don't need digital, will suddenly become a dinosaur. So I think it's something that everybody has to be worried about.
Even in my class, sometimes I find students, they say, I don't understand finance so well. And then there will be some students who would say, I don't understand the software aspect so well. And then you try to, create education in such a way so that you accommodate all kinds of people with different kind of learning preferences. You have been a trainer now for so many years. You are a veteran in this space. Do you have any message for such training institution or educational institutions that how they should probably train the future leaders so that the whole system can be more inclusive and probably we won't see more and more of only tech guys rising to the top?
I think, Sunil, it's all about, I just noticed a friend of mine called LS Murthy who's saying, IIM Ahmedabad is the pride of the nation. I'm sure 70% of the country believes that. But IIM Ahmedabad themselves train people who will be the pride of the nation. I mean, your alumni base is, absolutely amazing. One of my partners in the social industry, a lady called Ruchi Mathur, she's the CEO of our social business, and she's 95 IIM Ahmedabad. So there are so many people like this who are completely at the top of the ladder. I'm sure they were taught not digital, not technology, but learning agility in IIM Ahmedabad. So I think you should continue to teach people to be agile in their learning process. When I was in NITIE doing industrial engineering, my goal in life was to be an industrial engineer on the shop floor. If somebody had told me that 30 years later, this is what will happen to you, I would have thought, oh my God, what's he talking about? But I'm saying by instilling an interest in the future, an interest in new ideas, and an interest in learning, I think that is really where all management schools should be. But if you teach a rigid curriculum in a rigid pedagogy, I think there you're probably doing a disservice to students. That's something we have to think about.
Thank you.
Should I move on or any other questions?
Yeah. So Dr. Ganesh, summarizing some of the questions that we have on chat, and I also had it in my mind extending what Professor Sunil just said. I have a contrary concern because all the questions are coming with the assumption that all have mastered IT and all will master IT. To me, I think the equal challenge is also that given the emergence of so many new technologies, how do digital leaders, develop new talent to ensure that it fits the, different digital models and strategies? And you can see a bit of cynical points also from some of the audience. Where they are assuming that in education, business schools, they're doing nothing, which essentially means you have more responsibility. So how do you think companies can take care of their talent within the digital?
Okay, in defense of business schools, I must say, because don't forget, I ran a company called APTECH for 10 years. And APTECH and NITIE in the 90s were the early pioneers of computer education. And I still remember somebody used to tell me, these guys, all they need to do is skills. They need to know the latest Oracle 7.0 technology. The problem is that you don't go very far by learning Oracle 7.0. You have to move to 10.7 and 11i, and now I don't know what number is there. I'm out of the technology piece. I think by understanding how relational databases work, how two-phase commit works, which is what is the core. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I remember when I finished my mechanical engineering and got my degree and came home to my father. Father said, oh, the car is just broken down. Can you fix it now? I said, no, but I'm not an automobile mechanic. Then I'm doing mechanical engineering, but that's a fundamental difference. I think what business schools must continue to do is give the discipline, give the basic core context of whether it's, data science or data engineering, etc. But give the version number technology to people to learn. That's where learning agility will come. So I won't worry too much about technology. To my mind, technology is a commodity. If you don't get scared of technology, you'll always learn and you'll always adapt. But we can talk about it later as we go on. Presentation. So let's talk a little bit. I'll give you one slide on this whole brilliant thing called analytics. It looks complicated, but don't worry. See, for many, many years, including till about 3 years ago, when we talked about analytics, we were basically talking about converting data to information, creating these wonderful little, singing, dancing pie charts. And even today, when you see ads on television, when the guy sees a pie chart, he says, "Ha, yehi mujhe chahiye tha." It's all postmortem. I mean, you can have 500 pieces of computer stationery, or you can have a wonderful pie chart telling you what went wrong in production last month. So I think over the last 2 years, people have said, look, to be effective as decision makers, as leaders, you have to move towards a sense and respond or a reactive mechanism, a predictive or a proactive mechanism, which is where, first of all, data mining came in. How do you really explore the data warehouse or the data mart or the data lake or whatever you call it, and find patterns? How do you take that patterns and fit it into a machine learning model where people can actually, like fraud detection, for instance? I mean, you can actually do a cause and effect relationship and do fraud based on that. So I think that's where the statistical modeling and predictive analytics started coming. Today, for instance, a Facebook knows exactly what you will like. That's the predictive analytics, because I mean, you've been posting your entire life, lived what is called your social footprint or your social exhaust. And AI models are very easy to figure out what to predict what you want. And then they start prescribing. So when Amazon says that, look, people like you bought this book and this is available in stock, they're telling you in a very gentle manner, ki boss, we know what you like. You will like reading this. So why don't we send this to you? Okay. So, I mean, that's the move from descriptive to predictive or suggestive and prescriptive or cognitive. So essentially what, there are a lot of words on the slide, but it's for moving from essential management of data to figuring out what happened, which is the reactive, to why did it happen, which is exploratory, what can happen in the future, and what should happen, or what is the action we suggest. So this is the joy of really having a proper analytics maturity journey, which honestly, if you ask me, I would say 99 out of 100 companies haven't really mastered this chart. If I ask people saying, look, are you truly in the predictive prescriptive phase? Amazon is, Facebook is, but most of us running regular companies are really not in that space. So if you look at this, why do we want to do all this? Two things. Don't forget the two significant stakeholders of the enterprise. One is the customer, the other is the employee. So if you look at the customer, as I mentioned earlier, I remember doing an exercise for a Chicago-based insurance company where we actually plotted 77 different customer journeys. How many ways can they come in and interact with the brand? And every week we used to think of two more. Every touch point with the brand, or every journey, as we call it, setting a targeted outcomes. And for each buyer persona, there could be different journeys, where their motivations are different, their pain points are different. So it's entirely customized. So full journey mapping, moments of truth, what stage is there a buying decision being taken, and keep moving, in the sense that, you really drop these design thinking approach where you empathize with what the customer is, define what type of customer the person is, ideate, prototype a solution for him, test it, repeat it. So it's like a never-ending journey management kind of step. So let me flip. If you look at the employee, the biggest challenge organizations have, and so do universities, is that we have one cookie cutter approach to teaching people. Even L&D departments of companies, forgive me, but they just believe that, look, if I take 400 trainees, each one of them has to go through this training program. The model is completely outdated. So in fact, we have invested in a company called Skills Alpha. And what it does is something like this. It sounds very funny. But the minute somebody's joined the company, the bot will come up and say that, look, okay, give me your last few years of experience, etc., interaction. And based on that, the bot will know that this is what the person wants to do. Do you want to be a sales executive or a service executive? So she says, I know I'm in the career to be a sales executive. What does a service executive entail? And we'll say, okay, this is the skills that you have, which you need to unlearn. These are the skills you need to augment or learn more. And these are the new skills. And by the way, here are the skills. I'll give you the skills. So it'll go to what is called the contextual curated learning resources, because now people learn from YouTube, can learn from Netflix, can learn, of course, from the Coursera's and etc. And maybe the IIMA Ahmedabad portal or the HBR, etc., etc. So it will actually serve up to Aditi, the learner, exactly what she should be learning in the format in which she will think. Predictive learning will show that Aditi likes videos or learns better from videos, whereas Rahul might be learning better from reading text. So it will serve them what is most amenable to their learning style. It's adaptive learning. And then, of course, find them coaches and mentors from within or outside the ecosystem, enable them to participate in peer groups. So there are some outstanding digital platforms that are coming up, which actually enhances the learning capability of people by as much as maybe 80, 90%. I'm saying this is the power of digital as you see it. So this is the goal of leadership. I mean, this is the end of my third section, so I'll stop here. But basically what we're saying is a good leader is imagining, reimagining every stakeholder's journey all the time. Not shareholders so much, but definitely, as I said, whether it's customer, whether it is employee, it's business partner, let's say a supply chain partner or a franchisee. So you really need to incorporate digital touch points into every one of those learning journeys, and then you're successful as a digital leader. Questions?
Pramila, you want to start? Okay. Ganesh, I have a question. Ganesh, this AI has a very lot of potential and a very interesting predictive power. And there has been very interesting conversation around ethics, around risk. It also reminds me of essentially this whole thing around 737 MAX, which happened. And in a way, probably that was a big experiment, because if you have a lot of predictive power and AI in a machine, eventually the systems can become much more efficient by replacing or substituting human effort and human intelligence. Is there, for example, academicians have always debated about, have we given more than what probably we should give credit to leaders? Because organization is successful not just because of leaders, but is also because of so many other things, a lot of people in the organization. But leaders have historically over-appropriated credit for organizational success. Similarly, is there any hurry, or is there over-enthusiasm or overconfidence in technology? And should one be cautious about their applications so that we avoid incidents like 737 MAX, where they actually did not give power of overriding to pilots and they gave it to machine, and look at how many people lost their lives?
No, it's a very important question, Sunil, and let me respond to both your points. One is yes. I mean, you have to be extremely clear about the capabilities and the limitations of technology, which is why, earlier I cautioned about autonomous AI. Autonomous AI can run away with you. I mean, I remember I was speaking at a session about 4 years back with the then CEO of ABB, and we were asking him, what is your most interesting example of digital? And he said, look, we built a new factory just outside Beijing in China, which manufactures robots. And guess how many people we have there? So I said, maybe half a dozen. He said, no, we have just one person sitting in the control tower. All the workmen are robots. Everything is automated in the manufacturing execution system, warehousing, everything is automated. And it produces robots. We said, these are the factories of the future. And I was thinking, saying, oh my God, I mean, if this is what happens, what's going to happen? So I have a client, by the way, in Shenzhen, in China. And I remember in 5 years ago, in 2015, they had 3,000. If you imagine, I'm sure many of you have been to China. If you go to a typical chip manufacturing or an electronics factory in Shenzhen or Guangzhou, you will find these, largely women in that in fact, employed 3,000 women. They come in the morning at 8 o'clock, they work till 12 o'clock, they have a 15-minute lunch break, put their heads down for 15 minutes, sleep for 15 minutes, and then they work with a tea break, and that's it. So it's almost like watching robots in action, but they're human beings. So when you watch this in action, and I've been working with them for the last 5 years, if you look at, I mean, I went to China just before COVID, I think it was end of 2019. Same Shenzhen facility today has just 400 women, not 3,000. They employ close to 1,200 low-cost robots, very small ones, and each woman is managing 3 or 4 robots. So it's a completely phygital facility that's happening. This is what I call augmentative robotics. Similarly, I think AI will be working for us if we still control it. It should be a back to future kind of, wayward experiment, exactly what you said about 737 MAX. I mean, if you let AI override everything, then you better be sure that that is really, really good AI. But otherwise, till you're sure, I think the human override, ability to override what's happening, which is why the ABB guy has this guy in the control tower. Make sure that if something is going wrong or something is sensed, then like in the Japanese pull the plug system, you should be able to stop the line. I think that kind of manual override is important. Your point on leaders is also very important. I mean, I remember we used to do a lot of workshops with top management teams right through the 90s. And, very typically a very strong, charismatic leader. I mean, in America, they call them the 6'4", blonde hair, blue-eyed. You'll be surprised that 90% of Americans are still 6'4", blonde-haired, blue-eyed males. I mean, unfortunate but true. And Indra Nooyi is a wonderful, experience for them. But these guys all believe that, look, they drag the organization along with them. And we used to tell people, we used to show a picture. I think, boss, the most successful leaders are carried by the team to success. And then they give the credit to the team. But if you have to be Piyush mentioned John Chambers right at the beginning. And I still recall, I must give you a quick anecdote. I was chairman of NASSCOM. This is 2007. I remember people said, we must get Steve Jobs and John Chambers to come for our annual conference. I said, sure, no harm done in trying. So I remember sending a mail to Mr. John Chambers. It was promptly replied by his office, and then they did all kinds of investigation. And then Mr. Chambers actually showed up and did the keynote at NASSCOM. And I remember walking into the room half an hour before, because as chairman, I had to welcome him. And he knew everything about me. He said, look, how are you, Ganesh? And how's your daughter doing? I believe she's in Sloan Kettering in the US. I'm like, oh, wow. And then I was talking to my friend Harish, who was the India head of, he said, look, this is John. He's briefed for 5 minutes just before he meets anybody. And they tell him, these are the 5 questions you should ask. With artificial intelligence, national intelligence, I don't know. Thoroughly approachable. The reason for the success of Cisco to a large extent is John Chambers. Let's face it. At the same time, I wrote to Steve Jobs saying that we'd like you to come and speak in NASSCOM. So I thought I would not get a reply, or I'll get a reply from his office. I actually got a reply from Jobs at apple.com. It said, why would I? I'm like, is this really Steve Jobs? And I actually sent to somebody in his office saying, he said, yeah, I checked the URL. So it is very much Steve Jobs. So let me explain it for you. At that time, India was relevant for me. He says, Steve Jobs will never do anything which does not immediately add value to his bottom line. He's not going to come here because India is a future market. I'm saying Steve Jobs, to my mind, is the classic. Don't forgive me. He's a great guy. Apple Computer is a 3 trillion value organization. But Steve is the classic my way or the highway guy. And John is a typical collaborator. So I think it's a mix of the two. And like leaders are of very different types, I think digital leaders will also have to embrace everybody. That's how it works. Any follow-up? Yeah, Pramila. Sorry.
Yeah, so you spoke about ethics and not being carried away by the digital technology. So will it be possible for you to share very specific red flags for our audience that, okay, now it's time to look into your artificial intelligence, because the data that we punch in it itself can be biased.
My favorite anti-definition of artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence cannot be a substitute for natural stupidity. So you have to be smarter than the AI. Otherwise, the AIs will take over your life, as you see in all these science fiction horror movies. So I think it's important to realize limitations of technology. Immersive reality scares me to an extent, because children grow up in a world of immersive reality, not go to the park anymore. Say, look, the park is here. I've got a much better park on my computer or on my laptop. Why do I need it? So I think we have to be a little careful about what is the future of relationships in this world. But that's a social phenomenon which we won't discuss today.
Thank you.
Okay, let me finish my last section and then we throw it open for as many questions and for as much time as we need. So we're just going to conclude by discussing innovation and entrepreneurship. And no worries, we are well on time. But if I think about, I already talked about innovation a little bit. I said, look, I remember when I was in Harvard Business School, we used to have 3 amazing professors of innovation there. One, of course, all of us know, Michael Porter, who's conceptualized the whole innovation cluster in Italy and China and so on and so forth. And his work was amazing. Then you had Clay Christensen, who unfortunately died of cancer a couple of years ago. But Clay, of course, wrote this whole book on the innovator's dilemma, the innovator's solution. And Clay's point was, if you want something innovative to happen in your organization, find that pocket of innovation and spin it out. Don't let it be corrupted by the rest of the organization. And at that time, I was just building this company, Zensar. And there is actually a case study written on this, which I can send to any of you who are interested. It's taught in Harvard Business School on the Zensar approach to innovation. We chose the third model, which is my favorite, called the Michael Tushman ambidextrous innovation model. And there the model was that, look, you have to get a lot of things to work together, which means it's not just what you do as a great disruptive idea, but make sure internal ideas get to flower, make sure that external ideas, I mean, to your point, Sunil, on how do large academic institutions work with their techs. And that was the model which I liked, and in fact, which even today I like. So if you look at these three models, this is ambidextrous innovation. That how is your left hand innovating continually, whereas the right hand is looking at breakthrough innovation. Employee innovation networks now, and a lot of people are doing this now. Now, how do we get, like, even a lot of the digital transformation work we do is actually identifying in very traditional organizations, young people, put them together in what we call vision communities. And the vision communities actually look at digital innovation for the organization. And then the third is a model which I think Bajaj Finserv totally perfected. And I still remember this 2016. And I remember, we did initial research on, okay, where are the great innovative entrepreneurs who are working on our areas of interest, lending and insurance, etc. And we identified 40 of them. And we didn't try and do a Zoom call or anything. We just got into Sanjeev Bajaj's plane. I mean, there was me, there was Nanu Pamnani, who was one of the senior advisors, the three CEOs. We spent 10 days flying from, literally Tel Aviv to Boston, to Raleigh, to San Francisco, Bangalore, etc. Look at the commitment of management time. But at the end of it, we found some real gems from Israel, from the US, from India, who all became part of our open innovation network, which really means that the funnel of external technologies that came in through, in those days, the fintechs, in your case, it could be the edtechs, and actually became solutions through we created a sandbox for any entrepreneur, gave them masked real data, let them work as part of our ecosystem with a guarantee that, look, if you come up with a good solution, it will become part of our practice. The same thing today we are trying to do in the Global IT Center in State Bank of India, same thing that many of the companies that I'm part of are doing. But this is the whole innovation ecosystem idea. So I think this is something we have to think about. Every organization has to figure out what works for them. But I'm strongly recommending an ambidextrous approach, a combination of internal and external innovation, and all with a clear objective to driving the strategy of the firm. So a few thoughts on the various areas of innovation. I already mentioned, retail, nobody needs to go to a store anymore. Buying through trying can all be done through AI and augmented reality, etc. Banking, payments, financial, we already talked about. Insurance, I mentioned, a lot of aggregators, a lot of usage trackers. You can actually predict journey and, really predict what is the premium that should be paid, which is all now standard, part for the course. Education, I already explained, from the classic tele-education idea to HBX to SA, which is Skills Alpha. I just mentioned that employee technology. Healthcare, I mentioned. So I think all these are innovation ideas. And basically what we're saying is, and this is the point I want to make, that technology is fine, but don't forget that technology has to result in a re-engineered business process. I'm an old man, so I remember going to MIT in the 90s, early 90s. At that time, they just finished a very interesting research study called the Corporation of the 90s. And even then, they predicted that organizations will move from localized exploitation of technology to internal integration, to business process re-engineering, to business network redesign, to business scope redefinition. Today, when I talk about business models, MIT had predicted it in 1989. I think business models will completely change thanks to the evolution of technology. In India, what does that mean? That there will be multiple, the most hot area, in fact, it's now a $5.8 billion industry itself in the last 5 years, is what we call B2B SaaS, which is business to business software as a service models, whether it is the Zohos and the Dhruvas, so many companies which have become billion-dollar unicorns, whether it's for supply chain, wealth management, and of course, Paytm and MobiKwik, there's a lot of fashion at this point of time, but they'll come back. Health tech, edtech, insurtech, finance tech, everything is going to come back. And that's clearly there. You'll see a lot of automated platforms which serve up data. So data management will be like almost like a national platform for secure data. And of course, what I'm working on personally, by the way, through an entity called Lighthouse Communities Foundation, is how do we use amazing technology to enable, because don't forget, India has hardly 400 million out of our 1.3 billion population at work. And the World Economic Forum has identified youth disenfranchisement as the biggest risk to our country. And it's not people like you are on the call. It's, if you travel 20 minutes outside Ahmedabad, you'll see who I'm talking about. So I'm saying the next 400 million, okay, who can be the so-called demographic dividend or the demographic disaster? How do we use technology to enable them to join the workforce? And this is where the opportunity for young entrepreneurs is tremendous. So as I said already, the $1 trillion Digital India, we are an industry which is 200 billion. And Ashank and I have been part of this literally from the late 80s. But it'll move to 200 billion to maybe 350, 400 billion in the next few years, of course. But the $1 trillion Digital India will come from digital platforms. I already mentioned this, not just UPI, multiple digital engagement platforms of the country, which are powered by the National Optic Fiber Network that Prime Minister Modi announced in the Independence Day speech. But what is used to be called BharatNet, this will power the whole thing. And with 5G and quantum computing, this will completely change the opportunity. Opportunities, I already said, to expand and extend the UPI JAM kind of framework, other mobility. I mentioned this, SME marketplaces, financial inclusion, and major outreach through technology in education, in skills, in employment. You have to get every Indian to participate in the future of India. Otherwise, the so-called digital divide, I mean, all of you have seen the data of how much richer the rich have got and how much poorer the poorer are getting. We cannot afford that in the country. And this is where digital can really make a fundamental difference. So finally, just to conclude, this is the book we wrote and Bloomsbury published it, which is, I mean, very, very well received. As I said, our basic premise in this book was that these 5 things will determine digital success. That if you're a leader, I've already mentioned all of them, don't forget that mapping the way customers see, choose, and interact, how employees and business partners interact, that journey is what you should define. The technologies, you have to go beyond SMAC and IT to edge, what we call edge is, of course, the AR, VR, IoT, cyber physical, etc. Processes, not only manufacturing process through robotics, but business process through robotic process automation. All that is going to be important. I already emphasized many times the importance of data and analytics, moving from dashboards to predictive, prescriptive, AI, ML, etc. And most important, culture. I mean, if you think that only the digital natives will get it, and as Sunil, the question that you asked earlier, that if a few people have, I remember doing an early seminar 30 years back on IT, and the CEO of a very large company, which is very much a very successful company today. I remember he called me aside at the tea break and said, Mr. Natarajan, we have one VP who's very old world. He's going to retire in a couple of years. And can you think you can build technology which doesn't affect his function? So I said, Mr. MD, there is no way you can leave somebody out. Everybody has to participate for this to happen. And in digital, it's extremely critical. Everybody has to be skilled. Everybody has to feel that they're 24/7 digital to make it successful. So just to conclude, just in time before my throat gives way, I think it's extremely important for all of us to rediscover our leadership. In digital, it will demand different roles from you, different competencies, but you have it in you to make it happen. So irrespective of whether you're an educationalist, a leader in an organization, or an entrepreneur, make digital happen. So that's the basic purpose. So thank you for listening to me very patiently, and happy to answer any questions while I have a sip of water.
So, Dr. Ganesh, we've been broadly, talking about digital leadership and transformation. So will it be possible for you to help our audience to have a broader idea as to how they can measure the effectiveness of digital leadership, be it at a team level, group level, and organization level, both for leadership as well as digital transformation?
That's a very good point. I think you should first, because even in digital, people say, "Haan, kuch karte hain, try karte hain." It's not good enough. Okay? I think you have to sit down and say, I mean, even if you use the metrics I sent you or I showed you, I mean, look at what is our journey for technology next 3 years. Look at how our processes must change. Can process efficiency and effectiveness, can we set a target for that? Maybe a 40% improvement and be able to measure it. Look at data analytics, saying that, look, how effectively are we mapping every data from within the organization, from the external, from the customer base, from the partners, etc. Look at culture. I mean, can we look around the organization and ensure that everybody is part of the 24/7 digital culture? Once you set, I mean, in fact, I'm actually helping a few companies to do this thing. Let's draw up a 3-year map of where we will head. And even in some of the new companies, which are moving towards fully digital, I think that strategy is even more important. So once you do that, the organization is now going out and committing. The leadership is committing to the board that you will see maybe 40% better revenue and 60% better profits because of our investments in digital. Because if digital continues to be a nice to do and we kind of anecdotally say the whole itna acha kaam kiya, that shop floor is fully automated, but it isn't resulting in more sales or more customer satisfaction, what's the point? So I think that's something you need to think about.
Ganesh, thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. And you have covered almost every aspect of what it takes to become and aspire to become a leadership in this digital era. The last part on innovation, and even when we do programs at Ahmedabad, almost every organization today has realized the importance of innovation and investing in innovation pipeline and ideas pipeline. But one area where they really struggle is this area of creativity. And people struggle, and sometimes people also have this self-doubts. Am I creative? Am I not creative? Who would be creative? Are there specially gifted people who are creative in my organization? And somewhere I see this tendency of both upward delegation as well as downward delegation of creativity. So some people saying, look, I'm not creative, my team is creative, you have the responsibility of becoming creative. And then people down below are saying, sorry, I'm not so creative, I also don't get that much high salary, you get more salary, and therefore you are supposed to be more creative. So how do you deal with this problem of downward delegation and upward delegation of creativity in an organization?
See, at the end of the day, innovation happens through applied creativity. We all know that. So yeah, you're right. I mean, there are some people who are thinking all the time, reading all the time, innovating in their own mind all the time. Those people tend to be more creative. But there is no excuse for saying that, look, I don't understand creativity. I mean, the good old days have gone when you could tell the boss, okay, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. Okay, maybe there are still some people required to be done. And I keep saying, I mean, I'm sure as a professor of leadership, you know that. I mean, in the good old days, we used to say that, look, leaders are supposed to create great followers. But today that's ridiculous. Leaders are supposed to create more leaders. And how will more leaders emerge from the organization or from the academic environment or wherever if you're not creative? So I'm saying, except for if you're in accounting, you can't be very creative. But apart from that, I think in every function, you need people to be creative, becoming leaders because they're creative. And with the opportunities that digital throws at you, you're not able to adapt, I think you'll lose out. So, I mean, this is what Yuval Noah Harari says, no? That look, every 15 years, you'll be obsolete. I mean, if many of you have read the book Homo Deus, which is my favorite book, even beyond Sapiens. And what Professor Harari says is exactly that, saying, look, if you're going to, anyway, people are going to live maybe in the next generation, 100, 120 years. And if you started working when you're, let's say, 25, and you're going to live for 100, 120 years and be reasonably healthy, thanks to healthcare and everything else. So let's say you have a 75-year work span, not the lovely 30 years that we believe can retire at 58 and all that stuff. So if you have a 75-year work span and you're going to get obsolete every 15 years, you're living 5 careers in your lifetime. Scary, isn't it? So you got to keep innovating, keep being creative. And if you don't do that, I mean, then you're not going to be successful. So I think it's almost like when I finished my 3-5 year stints at Zensar, and I told my daughter who's in the US, maybe I should retire now and have fun. She said, are you crazy? She said, I have colleagues who are 75 and 76 in Sloan Kettering Hospital in Manhattan, and they are working harder than ever. So you better keep working till you're 80. So I said, okay, if that's what you say. So now if I have to work till I'm 75 or 80, I better learn new tricks. I mean, so I better learn metaverse. I better learn these things. No, otherwise I'm obsolete immediately. And all I will be doing is saying, when I was the CEO of this company, I was doing this. One millennial will say, who cares what you were doing when you were CEO? You're not me. So I think that is the imperative for all of us to stay up to date with technology. Otherwise, I mean, you just kind of lose it.
That's an interesting thought. I think both you and Ashank can recommend to IIMA board that we should not have a retirement age at Ahmedabad, so that all of us can stay young, say invest, and also prepare the next generation of leader. I have one more associated question. So, we talked about individual leadership here in organization, but then at global level, you also have country leadership. And somebody wrote in the chat box that data is the new oil. But if you look at the history of data, I mean, it led to wars, it led to hegemony, it had its own dynamics, right? It also led to a structure which I would, if I can take the liberty of saying, over profiteering. At one point of time, the cost of production was 20, but it was sold at 120, which led to huge wealth creation in some countries, resource curse in other countries. Does that mean that data probably will also create such kind of inequity at a global level? And one more thing, which is an associated question. Some people have, actually my students have asked this question. He said, look at Indian IT companies. They had the best coders, they had the best technology. How come Facebook, Netflix, and all these companies did not emerge from India?
Okay, two very different questions. So let me try and answer that. Let me answer the second question first. I mean, how did a Facebook and I still remember, I mean, when I entered the IT sector, which was probably mid 80s, and we had a company called Softec. Wipro itself, by the way, a very well-known company. Wipro had actually created something which is very similar to the office suite that you see nowadays. But if any of you recall, which was the first successful office suite, there was a product called WordStar, which you may have forgotten. There was a product called Lotus 123. Okay, and when the internet came in, there was a product called Netscape Navigator. Don't exist today. Why? Because this monster called Microsoft, and I'm saying it in a very appreciative sense. Microsoft, when they come in and they create Internet Explorer and Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and Excel, their marketing muscle just drowns out everybody else. In India, unfortunately, we never had either the guts, if I may say so, or the capability to attract that kind of capital to be able to take our products and make it work. So when people ask me and Ashank and Harish Mehta and so many others, saying, why is India not created products? We said, boss, we created 5 million direct jobs and maybe 21 million indirect jobs. What the country needed was employment. People, the early movers like FC Kohli and Narayan Murthy and Harish Mehta and others, they saw this opportunity and they created a services industry. Nobody came in the way of creating a product industry. I mean, today, the fact that the product industry is kind of in its teens, is becoming $10, $12 billion. The B2B SaaS industry is becoming 5-6 billion. Music to us. And we are hopeful. Even today, when I was watching CNBC this morning, you look at the star sectors, they say will completely outride the wave. They're not talking about tech. They're sadly or nicely talking about IT services. Okay, they're talking about the opportunity for IT services companies and of course industrials and cyclicals, etc., etc. So the point I'm making is we shouldn't worry that we haven't created the Facebooks and I'm hoping a Dhruva, I'm hoping a Zoho, which is giving Salesforce.com a run for its money. I'm hoping even a Byju's. Okay, all these can be new models for the world, but till they get there, let's keep creating jobs. I think that's the point. Now, Sunil, I've forgotten your first question. What was your first question?
Was it global inequity, data being...
No, that's a great point. See, I think the inequity will happen if there is asymmetry of data. Okay, which is why, I mean, I like the whole approach the Ministry of IT is now taking. Both Ashwini and Chandrasekhar. I mean, these are good people at the helm of affairs. We have a wonderful IT secretary, Ajay Sani. So these guys see the future. These guys are really seeing that, look, data. And I remember, even when I was helping the smart city of Pune with the smart city idea, the commission was very clear. Look, we must have an open data policy. So the availability of data access with due protection of privacy, etc., and really making it available that is why platforms are important. But platforms will automatically aggregate data, serve them up, dissect them, make them available to the marketplace. You're absolutely right. So when there's data inequity, it will automatically lead to inequality in the world. But if we have access to the same data that America has or Europe has or whoever else, then you will find that there is a lot more progress happening in emerging economies. And which is why Sub-Saharan Africa will take more time. But today, if you take South Africa has as good data access as anybody in the developed, which is why they're successful. So I think that is something we need to think about, that making data available, not just data. I mean, I did my PhD in knowledge management. And we all know this DIKW quartet, which is, data has to be classified, become information, had to get experiential input and become knowledge, and then get embedded in the organization and become wisdom. Think about DIKW in a societal or a country context. I think the country has to become much more equitable in terms of data. And then the country must have as much access or more access to data as the rest of the world has. That is where I think organizations or countries will move from emerging economies to developed economies. And I think that's the opportunity. Not easy. I mean, it's easy for me to say it. It needs very assiduous work on the behalf of government, organizations, etc. I mean, today, for instance, just to give you one example, we've been working in the city of Pune for 6 years in this entity called Lighthouse Communities. Today, we know every slum dweller in the city of, which child is going to which school. We know which youth needs to be educated. So out of the Pune Municipal Corporation has 650 slum communities, but we've actually Google mapped every one of them. So we know exactly who to teach education, who to get into digital literacy, into this. And today we have kind of covered about 30% of the population. And we know within 5 years, we made Pune a completely inclusive society. Now we are taking that model to Delhi, thanks to Mr. Manish Sisodia's support. We're taking the model to Odisha, and that's exciting. So if you remember, I said about the 400 million to be educated. I think this is data. The power of data enables us to reach out specifically to somebody and say, why don't you come into a course with this? And not कि मैंने एक plumbing institute चालू कर दिया है तो आप आके plumbing करो, but you come and discover what you want to do. Dream your dream and make it happen. And I remember Ashank and I were discussing this even 6 years back when Bombay first was doing similar stuff. All of us believe strongly in the potential of Bharat, but I'm saying data is also required to. Sorry for a long answer, but you touched.
No, it was wonderful.
You touched my passion point.
Thank you very much. Pramila, if there are...
I know there's a ton of questions on the chat line. So maybe Piyush, you're looking at the interesting questions and telling us there.
Yeah. Pramila, Piyush, if there are any interesting questions from the audience, I was so busy engrossed in conversation with Ganesh that I forgot to look at audience questions.
No, we'll give Pramila the next question.
Yeah. No. Actually, I think as far as questions are concerned, we have broadly covered up whatever was there in the chat box itself. Until unless you want to take up a question on semiconductor design industry.
Oh my God. No, I would actually love to. Okay, I would actually love to. I've written 12 books in my life. The last one is a bestseller on how India can compete with China economically, not militarily. So militarily, we don't particularly have a very good chance, but economically is important. But now there are 12 of us in the Pune International Center, including 2 Padma Vibhushans, Dr. Vijay Kelkar and Dr. Raghunath Mashilkar. So we've just collaborated and finished the manuscript of a book called Pathways to India 2030. And one of the pathways, I mean, we've actually described in that book saying, okay, all the, like for example, mobility. I also chair the Government of India's Center of Excellence on what they call ACES, which is Autonomous, Connected, Electric, Shared Mobility. And that mobility is one important thing. Methods of agriculture clearly is going to be an important thing. But one pathway we've clearly articulated is the whole ICT sector. Because I keep talking very proudly about our $200 billion IT services and products, etc. What we left behind, a lot of people blame us for it, saying that, look, you guys made computers so free to get from abroad that the hardware manufacturing industry of the DCMs and the HCLs, the Wipros went out of the window and the IBMs and the Dells came in. But it created the software industry. So today there's a clear opportunity, which I'm sure Prime Minister Modi and everybody else recognizes, that what is called the ICT layer. Because if you look at the ICT layer, information communications and telecom technology, I think clearly the opportunity is to be, if not necessarily large application units, but fabulous semiconductors, creating semiconductors for the world. And I think the government sees it. Even the productivity linked incentives, the PLIs as we call it, are oriented towards that. So I think that itself, by the way, while the IT services industry could probably go through by 2047, by the time India is 100 years old, I was just doing a prediction for the ministry this morning. And I'm saying, look, we should be at least $1 trillion in IT services. We should also be at least $1 trillion in IT products and the SaaS platforms. But we could be $2 trillion in ICT, which is the whole microprocessor, chips, etc., even cloud computing, etc. So I'm thinking potentially it's enormous. I mean, there are similar examples in chemicals, in pharmaceuticals, where we're already doing well. Similar examples in digitally enabled automobiles. I was talking about the Alcatraz earlier. I mean, today you see, we were actually discussing at the State Bank Directors Retreat in Bhubaneswar 3 weeks ago with Chandra, the Tata Sons chairman, who of course was a very active member of our industry and still is. And Chandra was telling us how the Tata Nexon, whom many of you would be aware is a wonderful EV, electric vehicle, was start to finish conceptualized and designed and produced in 100 days. So this is the power of Indian collaboration of a TCS and a Tata Motors, etc. coming together. So I'm saying if we start innovating like this, at this breakneck speed, using collaboration, using digital, imagine the future of this country. So as you can see, as Dr. Mashalkar says, I'm a dangerous optimist, but it's good to be a dangerous optimist. There are too many cynics on social media. But we have to believe in India. We have to believe in the power of digital India, and then we'll be successful. Am I sounding like a politician?
It's fantastic, Dr. Ganesh. I'm sure it's wonderful to discuss both the worlds, which are a little different. So thank you so much. The entire session was very amazing and enlightening. And so as you can see, if you're following the chat, everybody is very happy and very dangerously optimistic about digital transformation. Yeah, thanks a lot. Mr. Ashank Desai, wonderful to have you.
Ganesh, I'm reading just one question from the chat box.
Ashank was saying something. Ashank, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was on mute. So I said it was great to have Ganesh here at the center. We are doing some work in leadership which will impact not only India but all over. And your idea of tomorrow's leadership is really, I hope, will push all of us at center to go in that direction that he's saying. That will be a greatest kind of impact, which I'm sure with your enthusiasm and dangerous optimism or whatever would happen. I also have a question. You see, Ganesh, what happens is we are talking of digital in terms of delivery side of it, which you have covered. But I think even the content, the curriculum needs a touch to make it tomorrow's leaders which are passing through the system to make it happen. As we know today, IITs, as I keep on saying to management graduates these days, they get better salary and they are more run after than MBAs for the obvious reasons. So translating this content to make it tomorrow's leader itself is a journey. Do you have any thoughts on it? Or maybe we can talk it separately. I have a privilege of discussing you privately. Maybe other questions you can answer, but yes.
No, you're absolutely right, Ashank. And I think, like for instance, we did an experimental, we launched the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Analytics in Chennai. We actually chose a great partner in Los Angeles to kind of build it with. Young people are really lapping it up, because we are able to bring a very practical sense of, what makes a data engineer successful, what a data scientist actually happen. Employ a 24-year-old MTech and say, oh, here's my data scientist. But they've not been trained on the whole data science curriculum. You're absolutely right. So I would think that not only IIT Bombay, where of course you and I are both part of, and IIM Ahmedabad, I think we need to maybe reconceptualize and think of maybe 2 or 3 courses which are able to create the digital champions of the future with a unique curriculum, a unique content, and a unique pedagogy. And maybe see, maybe the Center for Leadership can take that forward. Because I think executives need it, the country needs it. Piyush and I are talking about the wonderful work you people are doing in Sikkim, for instance. I'm sure the young person in Sikkim who wants to be an entrepreneur also needs it. So I'm saying this is like a uniform leveler of capability. So Ashank, to your point, it will be absolutely exciting for IIM Ahmedabad and the Center of Leadership to really make it happen.
Yeah, I think we should do something on that. And grab Ganesh also in between.
Ganesh is always available for any cause for India, yes.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. So Ganesh, I was referring to, there is a question I believe somebody has asked, and it is about organization identifying digital transformation as a priority, but then executing it well probably are 2 very different requirements. So what kind of advice based on your experience can you give to people who are responsible for digital transformation and executing it really well?
It's a great question. And let me tell you how the thinking on this has progressed. I remember 7 years back, I was invited to speak at Gartner's, what they call the annual symposium in Barcelona. And at that time, even an entity as progressive as Gartner had started advising people, look, boss, your lights on mission computing should be done by your CI. That's your mission critical stuff, and it's what they call run the bank. The bank is just a euphemism for organization. But from run the bank to change the bank. Okay. Change the bank, they said, look, you probably need a chief digital officer who is only tasked with using digital to change the bank. And then they said that, look, marketing is in touch with the customer all the time. You should also allow the chief marketing officer to have our own maybe digital technologist who's helping her to create quick solutions. So in a sense, the early thinking was that digital will succeed if you have the CIO doing old stuff, the CDO doing relatively new medium-term stuff, and of course, people floating around all over the organization doing that. At some point of time, things started converging. So even for instance, today in the State Bank of India, we have the Global IT Center and the Chief Digital Officer. We also have an IT and digital advisory group, which consists of people from abroad and here. So it's an amazing system of bringing everything together. Because again, go back to my fundamental point. When you implement, forget about technology. When you implement, think stakeholder, think customer, think employee, think supply chain partner, maybe think shareholder as well. And then say, what can we do to make their journeys more successful? So the minute you look at it from an action-oriented point of view, then you will design it the way I said, keeping all those 5 parameters in mind, and then you will succeed. But the minute you say, I'll leave it to a technologist, then as they say as a joke, if you have the hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when somebody has a hammer called augmented reality, everything will look like an AR application. So you have to step back from technology, step back from process, step back from HR, step back even from data, and say, what is my holistic view, which will satisfy the stakeholder? If you do that, my experience has been that action becomes much more balanced, and you're as successful as all of us know, as the weakest link in the chain. So make sure you're protecting the weakest links and bring it all together. So I think that's the way implementation actually happens in the work.
Thank you.
And never implement technology because it is the latest and the greatest. Organizations don't need the latest and greatest. You can probably be a fast follower. It doesn't hurt. If you're planning your strategy and you're the first to do that strategy, you'll be successful. You don't have to have the best technology.
There is another question, Ganesh, which essentially is trying to test your dangerously optimism. And they say, can you take a realistic stand and look at, if you have a crystal ball, what is going to happen to India in terms of, are we going to, let's say, emerge as digital leaders of the world, given that the demographic dividend we have, investment we have, a great ecosystem which we have created, an aware government. So if you had a crystal ball, what will be your prediction?
I certainly think so. And as I said, there was a lot of worries about, heavy automation, robotics, etc. Is the IT services sector going to slow down? And facts have proved it wrong. Ashank himself has been part of 2 amazingly successful organizations. I've had the privilege of being part of 2 successful firms. And those companies are still growing. So I'm saying there is always going to be a hunger for identifying, assimilating, and implementing new technologies. And as the world moves on, it'll be even more so. So I think India can offer that. The problem we have in our country, which always worries me and which I've spent a lot of my time on, is our education systems tend to be a little archaic. And I'm not talking about the IITs and IIMs, but unfortunately, even if you go one level below, and of course, some of the NITs are very good, but if you go to small universities and colleges, obviously the faculty members themselves have no experience whatsoever. So you're taking people who are really teaching the old method. I think Ashank alluded to that. We need to change that. And we can't change it by replacing the faculty members, because if the market demand for IT is so much, some organizations are reporting attrition of 40%, they're not going to go into academia. But you must enable the academics to become good facilitators and ensure that industry comes together to create the technology platforms. A Stanford and a Berkeley, or even a University of Santa Clara in Silicon Valley, are successful because there's so much of collaboration with industry. I think that reach out is going to be extremely important. And that's why I said, an IIM and an IIT, because of sheer brand value, automatically get people. I remember having dinner with Nitin Noria in Harvard, and he was explaining to American faculty in HBS, saying that, look, we are proud that so many people apply to Harvard Business School, but our applicants are probably 1/20th of the people who apply to IIM Ahmedabad, which is true. You have natural demand, you have natural, phenomenal students coming through, and you hopefully make them a little better than when they came in. I'm sure you do. But I'm saying, if that is the role of IIMs, what happens to those guys? And think somebody mentioned disappointment of not passing, getting through CAT or whatever. But I'm saying we need to be very relevant for the middle tier. Now, there's nothing I can do for the absolute bottom 20% of institutions. It should not exist, but maybe they're providing some kind of education, which is fine. Okay. But forget about that. But I'm saying if we can transform middle tier, which is probably passing on, graduating 1.2 to 1.3 million students every year, then you're building a much more formidable human resource capability to make the next generation happen. And that's what I'm saying. They'll find application in the ICT layer, they'll find application in the automotive, everything is going to be technology. So somewhere I think we have to think about it, and hopefully the Ministry of HRD or somebody with a very large scale inclusive policy to make change.
There is just a very mundane question before I hand it over to Piyush. Because you referred to educational system, and I completely agree with you, I think that's where the focus and emphasis have to be if you really want to create a digitally enabled India, in addition to other initiatives. Now, in schooling system, there is an age when math is introduced. There is an age where English is introduced, or language are introduced, or other motor skills are introduced. Without referring to any company or so. I mean, today, if you look at it, there are so many companies which are saying early initiation, as early as 6 to 7 years old into coding is probably the sweet spot, is the right age at which coding has to be introduced. Do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I have two very contrarian thoughts. One is, in fact, I was on the advisory board of a little company in Chennai called SP Robotics. So it's SP Robotic Works. These guys they actually train little kids on robotics and automation. And I still remember when I was in Chennai for a board meeting, I mean, I met this little 9-year-old boy. Okay? And I asked him, what are you doing? And I spoke to him in Tamil and said, do you watch Rajnikant movies? So he looks at me as though I was some idiot and says, I do not watch pictures. So I said, oh my God, what do you do now? So then the boy says, I want to be the world's youngest Python programmer. Python, as you know, is an artificial intelligence programming language. And I'm thinking, what do you mean by world's youngest? He says the current world's youngest certified Python programmer is 10 years old. Before I'm 10, I want to be certified. And I was blown away. I'm saying my God, this little kid and this lady Sneha, who's the CEO of SP Robotics, was telling me that this guy is really, really good. So I'm anyway a great believer that in our education system, the brightest minds, the 14 and 15-year-olds, we send them through a college process which kind of kills their capability, kills their creativity, kills everything. Then hopefully some of them make it to IIM Ahmedabad and they get rejuvenated, but the rest of them languish in mediocrity. So I think that mediocrity is what I'm worried about, as I said earlier. But I'm saying if we can capture the 9.5-year-old Python programmer and maybe 20 million more people like him, not only in Chennai, but in small towns all over India, that can transform this country. So I think that is really what we need to make that happen. I can dream about it. Can I make it happen? No. But whatever we can do, we'll do.
Well, thank you very much, Ganesh, for such a fantastic and very, very comprehensive thought, and for covering almost everything from industry to at an individual level, to a country level, to at a global level. So I will now request, hand it over to Piyush for his concluding remarks and proposing a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sunil. So it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. So that is Charles Darwin for you. Clearly, the thing that is transforming is not the technology. I think it's the technology that is transforming us, all of us, you, me, everybody. Rolling stones gather no moss. I'm reminded, Behta Pani Nirmala. So, well, what an exciting discussion for sure. So, excellent nuggets, truly, Ganesh, and excellent questions, Professors Pramila and Sunil. On behalf of the Ashank Desai Center for Leadership and Organization Development, it is a pleasure for me to thank you all, first and foremost, the leaders out there. We've had yet another unprecedented turnout. Thank you very much for turning in. I hope you guys had a great time, and I could see so many complimentary comments coming in the chat box. And in conversation with Dr. Ganesh Natarajan today were Professor Pramila Agarwal and Professor Sunil Sharma. Thank you very much. We were privileged to have with us today the inimitable Ganesh. Thank you, Ganesh. You really rock. My personal thank you for agreeing to speak at the Ashank Desai Center at IIM Ahmedabad, and thank you, Ashank, for finding time to attend today's session. Good rest of the evening ahead.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. My pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you.